and welcome to Rajya Sabha television with me, Frank Pereira. The winter session of Parliament has witnessed disruptions and chaos as the opposition raised the issue of demonetisation in both the houses. Since the winter session of Parliament in 2013, this session has recorded maximum number of lost hours. According to PRS legislative research figures, Lok Sabha has seen only 15% productivity and the Rajya Sabha has seen only 18% productivity of the available time. This has resulted in an almost total washout of the ongoing winter session of Parliament. The focus has been of the politicians to in fact make statements outside Parliament rather than discuss some of these crucial issues within the confines of Parliament. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will discuss if media platforms can be alternatives to the floor of Parliament and who is responsible for the present situation. Joining me on the program today are H.K. Dua, senior journalist and former MP, Rajya Sabha; PDT Achary, constitutional expert and former Secretary General, Lok Sabha; Purushottam Agrawal, political analyst and writer. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Mr. Dua, I'd like to begin with you, of course, because you've been a stalwart as far as the media in this country is concerned. You've been the editor-in-chief of several national dailies in your lifetime. Can media platforms really replace what happens on the floor of the House and Parliament?
No, it cannot be done because both Parliament and press, the media, are essential part of democracy, but both have separate functions. One is the legislative body or deliberative body also, discusses policies, decisions, laws to be made or unmade, whatever it is. Media is supposed to project public opinion, there is no doubt about it, shaping the public opinion, which can influence all the institutions, whether it's Parliament, executive or judiciary or rest of the, or civil society and all that. The roles are different. Now, it is actually both are needed by the society and the public and the country. Both are needed. Parliament legislates or deliberates the policies, forces and accountability of the government to MPs and to people through the MPs. Press adds to the power of the people to enforce accountability of the decision makers, whether they are in Parliament or whether they are executive or whether they are, including the judiciary, I will say that. So the roles are different. What is happening is Parliament gets adjourned and they rush to the media outside. Now media cannot replace Parliament, you can give the platform, their voice which will be broadcast. If Parliament meets, discusses issues, passes laws in peace, media's role will be, frankly speaking, reporting and then analyzing the deliberations later on. But here, media doesn't say that you should neglect Parliament. Media is saying you work. And then if you want to elaborate your points to the public, you are welcome. There is a platform there. But you can't replace Parliament with media platform. I mean, media man will say, you can get good quotes from there outside for your channels immediately, but it cannot replace Parliament. So I think MPs who think this is enough to reach their constituencies through the media by giving a sizzling quote outside and not working inside, I think they are mistaken and ultimately they are found out.
Indeed.
Media needs the quotes.
Yeah.
Or what you call sound bites in your language. So they get the sound bites. They are not media is not discussing the issues through those sound bites.
Sure, fair enough. Mr. Achary, this is not the first time that something like this has happened. The last time something like this happened was when the 2G scam erupted. We saw the government that is in power today was the government, was the same party that was in the opposition that time, and the situation was similar, and a similar situation is repeating itself now 3 years later.
Yes, this has happened before also.
My question is, what kind of a precedent are we setting, and what is the message that we are sending out to the people?
Well, we are not setting a good precedent, certainly. There is no doubt about it. But in fact, you must look at Parliament a little closely to understand what exactly happens there and why this is happening. I have been in Parliament for about 40 years. in different capacities. I have been watching Parliament from the 5th Lok Sabha onwards. So I have seen Parliament at its peak, and then I have seen Parliament, you know, the standards of debate coming down, the standards of behavior falling, all that. So I have been an observer for 40 years. Earlier, when I started, you know, there used to be very scintillating debates in the House on all issues. And there were veteran parliamentarians. You know, Atal Bihari Vajpayee was there, Professor Hiran Mukherjee, Indrajit Gupta, Jyotirmay Bosu, Shyamnandan Mishra. You know, you just see the array of
Masani,
veterans, Masani, and Nathpai, and all that, you know. Such parliaments, it was my luck to have been there, to witness all that. And there used to be discussions. There used to be problems. It's not that we were free from problems and all that. Burning issues. But those issues used to be discussed. And often the government was put on the mat. Government is answerable to Parliament. So often the government is put on the mat. Now, after that, I think it was in the late 90s that some kind of protest started taking shape inside the House. You know, what I could feel was, at that time, perhaps there was a reaction to the insensitivity of the government, lack of responsiveness on the part of the government. So that was the reason why a certain amount of protest, you know, formed in the House, and people started thinking that perhaps making a speech is not enough. You know, you make a speech, the government will reply, the matter will be over. But the problem remains. So people started thinking about some kind of a collective protest and all that. They came, and of course that used to happen very rarely. Very rarely, even in
But that
the
seems
90s.
to be the norm today.
But now we have graduated to this level. Now, you see, disruption of the House used to happen on a couple of occasions. But now it has become a norm. Now, this is something unprecedented. In no parliament in the world does this happen. The whole session gets washed out. And that too on what issue? That no discussion takes place. Discussion should take place or not. It's a very puzzling thing. Why the parliament session should get washed out when both the parties want discussion.
Unfortunately, it doesn't look like things are going to change anytime in the near future, Mr. Agrawal. I mean, if you look at the kind of statements that have been coming from both the opposition benches and the treasury benches, it doesn't look like things are going to change anytime soon.
Well, to think about future, let us little bit go into the past. If I remember correctly, and I could be corrected, I think it was during the Narasimha Rao government, while demanding the resignation of the then communication minister, the parliament was not allowed to function for 3 weeks at a go. And it is from then that this became a kind of norm by and by, that instead of discussion, instead of putting the pressure on government through discussion or through occasional swap protest, the disruption of the proceedings of the House itself became a kind of protest. In fact, it's quite ironical that the present finance minister, when he was in the opposition only a couple of years ago, is actually on record saying that stalling the proceedings of parliament is a legitimate form of protest. So the point is that now the shoe is on the other foot. The problem in our country, unfortunately, is that we take positions not on the merit of the issue, but on the basis of our own convenience and our stand on the issue. I personally believe that if we really want to have a future in which this central institution of democracy, that is the House of Parliament, functions, then we will have to insist, the media will have to insist, that politicians behave and politicians take a stand on the issues of procedure, of propriety, irrespective of their own position on a particular issue. I mean, I can understand the government is quite happy with demonetization. I can understand the opposition is very unhappy with the demonetization. But again, I am open to correction. I think this is for the first time, this is unprecedented, that the treasury benches are actually creating as much ruckus as the opposition.
I haven't seen earlier that kind
Sorry?
of. I have not seen earlier.
You have not, I mean,
Right.
you have been with associated, he has been a member of parliament.
I've been correspondent covering parliament since '64.
And you have covered parliament for so many years, then member of Rajya Sabha. I mean, this is unprecedented, which shows that nowadays people are fast losing, people, I mean the leaders, are fast losing the interest in the institutions of democracy. In fact, willy-nilly they are subverting the democratic institutions and procedures. Because the treasury bench is stalling, disrupting the proceedings, this is unprecedented.
Indeed. Indeed. I'm also joined on the program now by Mr. Soli Sorabjee, former Attorney General of India. Mr. Sorabjee, we've seen in this winter session of Parliament only 4 bills being passed. Rajya Sabha has seen 17% of productivity. Lok Sabha has seen 15% of productivity. And like Mr. Agrawal has just suggested that it is unprecedented. This is the first time where we've seen the treasury benches, in fact, protesting on the floor of the House. Who is to blame really for this present situation? And do you see the situation improving anytime in the near future?
Well, I'm not very hopeful or optimistic of the situation improving because I think our parliamentarians don't realize the importance of the function they have to perform. I mean, you may criticize the government, certainly it's a right to do so, duty to do so, but after having done it, don't go on disrupting the House. If you do that, then the whole point of functioning of democracy becomes defeated. Debate and discussion are sine qua non in a democracy. Now, if you don't allow that to happen, then there's no meaning to it. And there's no use saying that you did it last time, so we will do it this time. That's meaningless. After all, people have to serve and discharge their functions for which they are elected, and not oppose the passage of legislation which is even beneficial to the nation. I think that's very wrong. They're doing a disservice to democracy.
Indeed. Points taken. Mr. Dua, would you say that the politicians, by doing this, are only ensuring that their credibility somewhere is lost?
Loud.
I would say the parliament as an institution's credibility will get lost in case they don't come back to the House and see to it discussions take place. Whether the case, your case is strong or the government's case is strong, the forum for discussion, passing the laws has to be the floor of Parliament, not outside.
Indeed.
Now, why they make noise after adjournment, they make statement, the question you posed earlier. One is possibly the influence of TV also, I might say. The message, I asked a couple of MPs when I joined the Parliament, after covering Parliament of the great people which Mr. Achary has spoken about. It was a pleasure. It was part of our education in public affairs in the gallery. But why Parliament is adjourned, but committee meetings are in order. Nobody walks out. Discussions are in order. Opposite view. And if you throw up ideas, which sometimes they may not have, they welcome it across the board, across the party decisions. Later on, the role of the whips come. If you throw committee meetings open to the television, I think the behavior will be similar. Through the television, they're trying to impress. So I asked one MP, why you are the first one to lead the charge into the well earlier, before the last elections? Now the boot is on the other leg. Don't you think your constituents will reject your? He says, no. They think, my constituents think that our MP is working hard. So that is the hard work definition is outside, not inside.
So the MPs are playing to the galleries is what you're saying?
Absolutely. No, and gallery has become 1.3 billion people. Earlier gallery was, in our definition, well...
Indeed. I think Mr. Sorabjee was making a point. Unfortunately, I cut him short there. Mr. Sorabjee, please go ahead and complete the point that you are making.
No, I've already made it. And actually, as I said, I think it all depends on the parliamentarians really realizing the importance of the functions. And at present, I'm not very optimistic that this realization will come, except when it's going to pass. Whenever there are bills which increase their perks, increase their salaries, they're unanimously passed. Now what does that show? I mean, they are there really speaking to really put the government on the map and thereafter listen to the government's reply so the people can make up their mind as a result of the debate. This disruption, I mean, makes the debate meaningless, and as I said, makes functioning of democracy also meaningless.
Indeed, indeed. Mr. Achary, isn't the onus on the government really to ensure that the parliament functions normally? You know, the opposition on the floor of the Lok Sabha has been demanding a discussion on demonetization, but they want to ensure that voting is held at the end of it. Why doesn't the government heed to that demand and allow parliament to function smoothly?
Well, that is very baffling actually, you know, because the government has majority in the Lok Sabha. Now, an adjournment motion, for example, was given notice of by the members. You know, the adjournment motion can be discussed only in the Lok Sabha, not in the Rajya Sabha. Now, why should the government be afraid of that? Now, unfortunately, in fact, not only at the present presiding officers, but the presiding officers all over India, you know, they are afraid of this adjournment motion. As if an adjournment motion is admitted, the whole thing will collapse. That seems to be the thinking of the presiding officers. There is nothing like that. It's a censure motion, certainly. But it is a motion which seeks to discuss a matter of urgent public importance, in which maybe the government has failed in some respects, and the members of the opposition want to criticize the government on that count. It is their right, and that is why the rule is there in the rule book. But invariably, I have seen speakers refusing permission to members to move this motion. There is no reason at all. If it merits, you look at the merit of the motion, subject, you allow it. When Somnath Chatterjee was the speaker, he used to allow adjournment motions, which was a departure from the past. He would look at the merit of the issue and he would say, yes, I admit this. Nothing will be lost. The government has majority. Government has nothing to be afraid of. That is the thing. So the opposition will have the satisfaction of having raised an adjournment motion and having berated the government. Well, that is their role. They put the government on the mat on issues on which the government has failed. That is their role. They have to play that. If you say that no adjournment motion under any circumstances, I mean, that would only aggravate the situation. Similarly, if the opposition demands a motion under 184, well, 184 motion, if the motion that you are giving notice of complies with the stipulations in the rule, then you should allow it.
Yes.
You should allow it. Yeah. And that is why the rule is there. And opposition members have a right. The presiding officers actually should be conscious of the rights of the opposition also. And they should look at the rule. After all, why are these rules there in the rule book? These are to be used, invoked for different purposes on different occasions. That is the thing, you know. That is one of the reasons why there is always a ruckus in the House. Because if you say, if you move a motion or if you give a notice of 56, that is adjournment motion, or 184, invariably the response from the presiding officer comes, no, it cannot be allowed. You can have only a 193. That is a discussion without any voting.
Indeed.
Without any voting. Now, it is their right. The point is, you must recognize the right of the opposition also.
Fair
now,
enough.
I will just make one more point.
Very quickly.
A very interesting thing happened yesterday before, I think it was yesterday or day before yesterday. In the Rajya Sabha, they unanimously passed a bill on disabilities. Unanimously. In fact, the demand came from the opposition. I was watching the proceedings.
They didn't even want a discussion.
Demand came from the opposition that we are prepared to pass this even without discussion. It was a very huge, voluminous bill running into about 90 clauses or something, you know. So it would take time, and hundreds of amendments were moved by the government itself. But they passed in the whole thing in maybe 2 hours or 3 hours or something.
Yes.
There was unanimity on that. So if they want, they can pass legislations. If they want, they can bring unanimity, consensus and all that. If they do not want, then of course you can see what happens.
But the
Sure.
income tax bill in the Lok Sabha, amendment bill, income tax law amendment bill, was passed without discussion.
Sure.
On
That
which
was-
discussion should have been allowed.
That was
But
really
one
very
point I
bad.
would like to add. Basically, the culture of tolerance is missing in Parliament. Government does not like to see dissent being voiced in Parliament. That is the problem. Earlier they used to welcome, there used to be in Parliament of those days, which Mr. Achary has pointed out, they used to accept Mrs. Gandhi's administration, accepted amendments to the finance bill coming from totally an opposite side. Swatantra Party had just 2-3 members, Masani and Dandekar used to press amendment after amendment after amendment after dozens of amendments, and sometimes they were incorporated willingly by a receptive, even Mrs. Gandhi. That was of
Sure.
course the pre-emergency days. People like Madhulimai, there are 2 people just in the Lok Sabha, he and one Barabanki chap, Ram Sevak Yadav. They used to be afraid of Madhulimai's speeches, but he was never denied the right to speak there.
Indeed.
Ramanur
No,
Lohia.
that's a very valid point that you're
Acharya-
raising about tolerance, of course.
Acharya
That seems to be
Kripalani-
missing at this point in time.
Acharya Kripalani, Ramanur Lohia, they made trenchant speeches in Nehru's last days against Nehru. Nobody was silenced. Nobody
Sure.
was silenced. Now there is the atmosphere of silencing the opposition. Now that leads to then intolerance by the other side also. So tolerance is very important. Tolerance of dissent is very important, which is disappearing outside as well as in the house. And that's so attitudes are getting harder and harder and harder on both the sides.
Sure, fair
There
enough.
is a need to imbibe the democratic culture.
Exactly.
That is the,
Indeed, indeed. Very valid points that you're making at this point in time. Mr. Sorabjee, a couple of things that I wanted to raise with you, of course. The fact that the opposition in the Rajya Sabha has been demanding that the Prime Minister be present for the demonetization debate and also apologize really for some of the statements that he has made outside the House, saying that he is accountable to the House itself. As far as the Constitution is concerned, is the Prime Minister accountable for what he has said outside the House? That being one issue. And the second issue, of course, Vice President of the Congress Party, Rahul Gandhi, has said that he has got, damning evidence against the Prime Minister about corruption allegations, and he is going to reveal them only inside the House. Why is it that he wants to reveal it only inside the House? Because is he worried that he's far away from the defamation case? Really, if he speaks outside the House, he can be held liable for defamation.
Well, I think you should really pose that question to Rahul Gandhi. I think he'd be better able to answer it. But I agree, the whole idea of saying in the House is to get immunity for any proceedings for defamation. But look, let's not play these political games. There are more important issues involved. And that's being lost sight of. And that's what worries me very much. What's the idea of saying, read my lips? And you will see that I'm challenging the Prime Minister's patriotism. Whatever it is, have some material, put it before the House, let the people learn about it, and then form their own opinion. Just making these wild categorical statements without backing them up with material doesn't lead anywhere. In fact, it shows political immaturity.
Sure, fair enough. And I've got 2 minutes left on the program, so I'd like to get final closing comments from all my guests. But Mr. Agrawal, L.K. Advani today has gone on record to say that, if the Parliament session is adjourned sine die tomorrow, that is the last day of the winter session of Parliament, it will be a defeat of the institution of Parliament itself. Would you agree with that assessment?
I couldn't agree more with him. You see, the point is that particularly for the government of the day, and as an individual, as we know, the Prime Minister is described as the leader of the House, not only leader of the Treasury benches. It is certainly their constitutional and moral obligation to create situations conducive for debate, discussion and dissent. If there is an intolerance for dissent, if every critic of Prime Minister is to be termed as anti-national, if every critic of the government is to be termed as motivated, inspired from the across the borders, then you can certainly not have a healthy discussion. I am more concerned about the fact, you see, in a democracy or in history as such, people who think themselves very important, people who have megalomaniac self-perceptions, they come and they go. But the institutions are important. The countries and civilizations are important. I am worried about the institution of parliament. I am worried about the institutional decay of parliament. Because both parliament and media are the cornerstones of democratic structure. And it seems that parliament is not being allowed to function. Parliament is in the process of losing its very credibility. Media is behaving, to say the least, in the most funny manner, particularly the electronic media these days. And in such a situation, I am actually concerned with the future of democracy as a real institutional framework as such.
Fair enough. 2 minutes. I've got 2 minutes left on the program, so I'd like to get closing comments from you very quickly, Mr. Achary, the point that you want to make.
Actually, you know, the main issue in this parliament session was participation of the Prime Minister in the proceedings. Okay. Now, Prime Minister has a constitutional duty to come to the House, explain the decisions that he has taken to the Houses, to both the Houses, because he is the person who is charged with the responsibility of ensuring executive accountability to Parliament.
Yes.
Which is a constitutional responsibility. It is not that somebody has to invite the Prime Minister to the House to be present there. Prime Minister has to come, because that is his obligation, not merely moral obligation, constitutional obligation.
Sure.
To come to the Houses and explain all these policy matters, you know. Actually, the whole problem that bedeviled the Houses, both the Houses, revolves around this issue. The Prime Minister's non-participation, or Prime Minister staying away from the House, and all that. That, in fact, you know, unfortunately, I must say that for some time, this has been the pattern.
Indeed.
Prime Minister staying away from the House, or when there is a ruckus in Parliament,
Sure.
Prime Minister quietly moving out without intervening or without bringing the House to order, without reaching out to the opposition and all that. This has been the pattern, you know. That is very...
A quick closing comment from you, Mr. Doe, because I'm completely out of time on the program.
I'll agree with Mr. Achary, the Prime Minister should be there, particularly on a decision like demonetization, which has shaken from somebody from hut or farmhouses or rich to the poor. Every house in India has been shaken by this decision. I'm not on the merits of the decision it is. But no parliament can function without political parties, government as well as opposition, arriving at a consensus on various issues. Where is the point of difference on fighting terrorism or foreign policy or nuclear policy? And one of the points, I have been emphasizing that in Parliament also, in previous situations of adjournments, you need consensus on running a Parliament also.
Sure, sure. Fair enough.
That is very, very important, and that initiative of consensus should come from the Prime Minister himself.
Indeed. And Mr. Sorabjee, I'm going to have you let you have the last word on the program. Please close the show for us with your final closing comments.
No, I agree. It's the constitutional obligation of the Prime Minister. It's not as his women fancy. But my point is constitutional obligation to explain and to reply to the charges made by the opposition. But you should allow them to speak. If you don't do that, if you create a ruckus there and prevent it from doing it, then the whole point of democracy functioning in our country becomes meaningless. That's what worries me.
Fair enough.
It's not a question of what they did, what we did. Please look at the future. We don't rake up the past. We have to redeem the future. And the future will be redeemed if parliamentarians take their functions seriously as representatives of the people. My worry is Parliament's image will be tarnished and people will lose faith in Parliament, which will be disastrous, which will be a disaster. And measures should avoid it at all costs.
Indeed.
Sorry, my voice is not too good.
Indeed. All right. On that note, we'll have to call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture because we're completely out of time on the program. Mr. Soli, Sorabjee, Mr. H.K. Dua, PDT Achary and Purushottam Agrawal, thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with me on this edition of The Big Picture and putting things into perspective for us. That's all the time we have. Thank you so much for watching.